After understanding what democracy is, let us now move on to understand why democracy. When there are so many other forms of government are available, why do we need to discuss about democracy? What have we learned so far? Features of democracy through case studies and a lecture by Revant, and of course we listen to the TED Talk. As usual, here is a warm-up for you. A pen can also present you a problem, isn't it? Your time is 30 seconds. This problem requires only clarity in our thoughts. That's it. Forget about Raj, Riya, Rai. The words that confuse you. It is only about transaction. If you know what happens during a sale, that's it. You can easily understand the problem. Here comes again Revant with his powerful arguments in favor of democracy. Fasten your seat belts.
Hello everybody, welcome back. And in today's lecture we will be discussing again about democracy, but one really particular element, which is we are going to understand why democracy could be one of the best systems that the world has seen so far. If you look at the current world, as I said even in the previous lecture, every country, even if it's not a democracy, aspires to be a democracy. Democracy is considered the most advanced, most progressive, most civilized form of political being. Primarily for this reason that democracy is based on popular will, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French philosopher, called general will. That in democracy, what people believe, what the mass believes, becomes the final decision. That is why democracy has so much glamour. But let's sort of break this apart and understand exactly what we mean by that. What exactly, where is general will bearing out in democracy? And democracy has all its flaws, and we will discuss that as well. And I am not saying this because the world believes it, but because this is my personal belief. I have a lot of faith in the system of democracy, and this is why I think so. And I'm going to give you some of the arguments that people usually put forward, but I'm going to I use India as an instance. Why India chose democracy, right? That's that, and we will explore different aspects of post Indian independent history, as well as a little of colonial history as well, to look at why democracy could be one of the best systems, correct? So the first obvious reason that people usually attribute for democracy's robustness is that it makes the government accountable to the people. Since the government is consists of the people make the government. They are electing the government, and the people who are elected come from the general mass. Therefore, since the people who are crowning the people in power are the populace, these people become accountable to the populace. Therefore, democracy is one of the most accountable forms of government. And what do I mean by that? It is not that other forms of government are not accountable to the people. It's not that the kings are not accountable to the people, but they are responsible only out of their largesse. You see what I mean? It means that the king, if he wants to do, he will do good. It is completely out of his generosity. He is not by many statutes of law expected to serve the people, right? But again, there's a history to this. Democracy grew out of different monarchical systems, right? So let's say there is a famous example of Magna Carta, right, from 1215, in which people demanded the king that he must act in their interest. So this is one step closer towards democracy, right? But it's still monarchy. But the very fact that they're asking the king to act in their interest is a democratic move. Okay, so any move towards accountability towards people is some move towards democracy. There is democracy in the essence, right? Uh, Now, again, as I said, I will come to the Indian case. Uh, Even the British colonial government claimed, even though it was a monarchy based in Britain, even though there was very little power vested in Indians, since they claimed to have to share the interest of the Indians. They believed they were in many ways democratic themselves. But it is barely the case. If we use the previous tests that we used in the previous class, we will know that they fail in every way because none of the decision makers are elected by the people, right? There's no election at all. In fact, I mean there are. I will come to that in a while. But the major power taking body, there is no election. So all of these things, right? Therefore, we see a stark difference in the kind of policies that the British have. If you look at the kind of deindustrialization that happened during the British reign, there was reduction of industries. There was pauperization. Farmers were losing wealth, and the soil quality in fact fell. There was very low irrigation, except places where there were dams built. The local sort of indigenous systems of irrigation were destroyed. Yeah. um, and by and large the growth rate was very minimal throughout the British reign, throughout the British Raj. And some examples are extremely stark. Now let me give you this statistic. Between 1850 and 1899, 24 famines occurred in just 50 years, almost just a half a century. 24 big famines occurred in Raj. And one of the reasons is that people did not even know these famines were occurring, right? There was not enough reportage. Even if there was reportage, people could not do much about it. All they could do, journalists could fight about it. Journalists did not get arrested. In that they were democratic. They did not get arrested for reporting about this, but they could, through institutions, they could not do much to challenge that because they did not have much power in their hands, right? But we know that British respected some kind of democracy because in 1790, a much bigger famine occurred in Bengal because of the Permanent Settlement Act that the British passed. All the powers was kept in the hand of the Zamindar, who was forced to exploit the peasantry, and the peasantry ran out of money, and the agricultural production fell. And in 1790 to 91, a huge famine occurred, and this was when the British Raj did not exist. East India Company was controlling India, right? Therefore, the British government tried to take control of the East India Company because they felt they were more accountable. So that sense they had this sensibility that only in democracy people are accountable, but it was never therefore they were never completely accountable. Since they were never completely accountable, we see this kind of a record happening. And in 1943, one of the largest famines in world history occurred in, again, Bengal. And this was very much created, this was cultivated by the orders of the British Prime Minister at that time, Winston Churchill. But if we see after independence, there is a clear decline in the number of famines, because if there is a famine, all the 20 to 30 or 40, depending on the time of Indian history you take, all those parties just bark and growl and tear you in pieces. So that will force these people who run the government to be accountable. And I think that was the intention behind India choosing democracy as well. They knew the people who were making who were part of the Constituent Assembly knew that the faults of continue if democracy was not there. And in fact, to be honest, the British took several steps towards the kind of Constituent Assembly that was created. In fact, the Constituent Assembly was one of the packages that the British offered us. And where did our politicians get practice of representative democracy? They got practice because of the assemblies that British created. In fact, in 1937, in all the different provinces, legislative councils, as they were called at that point, were created, provincial councils, where the Congress leaders were elected to be chief ministers. So they had already served. So again, there too, it was clear that only a democratic government is accountable to the people, and those are the lessons that people picked up and applied after independence. Now, too, the kind of decision making will improve, because in generally by and large improves in democracies, because simply because of the number of voices. Now let's look at, again let's go back to the British. There was generally a homogeneous lot. They were generally a homogeneous lot. They were largely from England, right? They were trained in some kinds of studies, and they more or less thought they were helping the Indians in some way or the other. So they had some kind of bend of mind, right? But let's come to the democratic Indian governments. Let's look at the first government, 1947 to 1952. That was the first Indian cabinet, right? Let's look at the diverse voices that existed. Who was the Prime Minister of India? The Prime Minister of India was Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay, he was a Kashmiri Pandit, Kashmiri Brahmin, born in Allahabad, um, and he was a lawyer by training. His father was a lawyer. He was a very wealthy man. He was trained in Cambridge, and he was extremely brilliant in all the sciences. He was an ideologue. He wrote. So that was the kind of background. He was a socialist by ideology, and so he believed in state planning. That was his ideological bent. Now let's look at the first Home Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. So Jawaharlal Nehru was the Prime Minister as well as the Foreign Affairs Minister. The Home Minister and Deputy Prime Minister was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who was a Patel. He was a peasantry he was a peasantry. He was a landed peasantry caste. That was where he came from, and he was a Gujarati. He was a conservative Gujarati, and he was a very staunch Hindu. While Jawaharlal Nehru was known for his love for meat and wine, this man was a teetotaler, non-smoker. He was a vegetarian, and he believed he was a personally a Hindu, completely different from Nehru. And who was the law minister? The law minister was B.R. Ambedkar, the drafter of the Indian Constitution. He was a Dalit from Maharashtra, and he was trained. He was trained in Columbia University. He had a PhD in law. He studied economics. He studied political science. He was a brilliant scholar, and he believed that you need lots of institutions, reservations for Dalits, reservations for Muslims, for the upliftment of the Dalits. Completely different voice from both Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel, in fact. Yeah. And then you had Shyam Prasad Mukherjee. He believed India is a Hindu nation, completely different from all the three. In fact, he was not even from the Congress; he was from the Hindu Mahasabha. Yeah, and there is Jagjeevan Ram, again a Dalit man from Uttar Pradesh. Yeah, and then there's the president Rajendra Prasad, a Kayastha from Bihar. Completely different backgrounds, completely different voices, completely different political ideologies, completely different kinds of people. And imagine the kind of robust discussions that they would have had, because of India having a democratic system. And in fact, I mean, you will hear all kinds of myths, that there was unilateral decision making. That's completely wrong. In fact, you know why? For example, there are many places where Nehru had his word, but there are many places where Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel had his word. Because you know why? This is not Nehru's greatness or Patel's greatness. It's democracy's strength. For example, Patel, he believed that privy purses. He was in charge of the unification of princely states in India. Correct. So and one of the promises that was made to the princely states was that they would be given stipend, they would be given pension every month, because they were losing their estates. And Nehru believed that this was feudalism, this was backwardness. Why do we need to protect princes? They are not democratic people, they are not elected, so why do we need to give them money every month? But till late 1960s, till late after Nehru's death, till Indira Gandhi became Prime Minister, privy purses, the pensions were continued. And this was Patel's idea. But state planning, nationalization of different industries, that was Nehru's idea, and Patel staunchly, disagreed with him, opposed it. But there Nehru had his word. Again, President uh, uh, Nehru had his word, while President of Congress Patel has had his word. Again, completely democracy. And you can imagine the kind of rich discussion that happened, right? There was a strength because of different voices existing, and different voices are only tolerated in a democratic setup. And next, let's look at the question of ethnicity. How does democracy allow different ethnicities to coexist? For example, we know that different parties, different regional parties, different national parties have different political interests. When parties fail to form independent government, and when they do not have absolute majority, they work together to form governments and then lead to each other, and that happens because of a democracy. Now look at, for example, there were many accords that were signed in India's history, with, let's say, the Punjab Accord, the Assam Accord, and in each of these places the movements became political parties. It is because those movements were allowed to exist because of freedom of protest, and then those were allowed to become political parties because of representative democracy, that the state and the nation and the state were able to come into discussion. Now places where this democracy did not exist, this was very, very difficult. For example, in Rwanda is a famous example of that. Hutus and Tutsis, two different ethnicities, in it's still torn. Hutus and Tutsis have literally ripped apart the state of the country of nation of Rwanda. Still not coped up, and democracy has still not come to Rwanda. But in India somehow we are able to move, across these different divides because everybody is given the right to vote, right? Again, that I would, in my opinion, that is a victory on the part of democracy. And finally, democracy, because its origin, in fact, its very origin lay inside equality, democracy also begets equality. And one of the strongest proponent of democracy was B.R. Ambedkar. And why? He believed that that's the only way Dalits would get emancipated. So if one man has one vote, voting a Dalit man and voting a Brahmin man is the same. That's it. It's done. That's how we will break free from these different differences and hierarchies that existed. Imagine in the first general election that happened in 1951 to 52, there were all this society was completely stratified, but to vote, all man, woman, Patel, Jat, Brahmin, Reddy, Dalit, everybody had started to stand in the same line. And if and it does not, the one man only has one vote, so it does not matter who he is, as long as the only thing that matters is the fact that he voted, and only once. So that B.R. Ambedkar, for example, thought would free Dalits. And in one other way, because of representative democracy, people can escape the clutches of the village. That's what Ambedkar believed. In the village, he thought, every person is treated differently. But if you create a strong constitution and a strong parliament, in the parliament this cannot enter because it's outside the village completely. That the power should be completely outside, and everybody should be allowed to access to that power. As long as the power is brought in, as long as the current institutions continue to exist, inequality will continue to exist. Yeah. And as I said, we imagine, without democracy, could India have had two Dalit presidents? There are Dalit parties, for example, the Bahujan Samaj Party explicitly is for the Dalit Bahujans. That would have been almost impossible without a representative democracy. We can vouch for that. We're almost certain. And even the parties that existed before independence existed because of the favor of democracy, because the British were showing, we have provincial assemblies, therefore these parties came. These were one of the first anti-caste unions were these political parties, and these political parties existed because there was an election for Bombay province, and so therefore, for example, like even Ambedkar formed his Dalit Caste Federation party because he knew, he was confident that if people voted him, he could go and sit and debate with another, upper as an equal. In his village, he was not able to do that. He was not allowed to drink water from the tap. He was not given any, no barber would come to cut his hair. He was not given any residence anywhere. But democracy permitted all of that, Therefore, these are some of the best arguments for a democratic system. And but we need to keep in mind that democracy does not, it's not fundamentalism in that one, you know, there are, we need to follow these rules. Democracy, we need to understand in terms of its principles more than its institutions. In fact, democracy means freedom, equality, togetherness, progression, these things, you know, welfare, well-being, these are what democracy means. And any institution, this does not necessarily have to be voting, you know, any institution that preserves these is democratic. Therefore, even though the Indian constitution says right to equality, every person has to be treated by law equally, we still have a system of reservation, because we believe, the Indian constitution believes, the lawmakers believe, that these different values can be progressed only through these, through the institution of, let's say, reservation, right? That's one example. We can debate that again when we come. Okay, when we have a live class, we can debate that. But we need to keep this in mind, because that, for example, I mean, that's what Ambedkar was believing when he wanted a parliamentary democracy. He was clear about Dalit reservation. In fact, before independence, he was clear about the Dalit separate electorate. Okay, the Dalits could vote separately. In fact, that's what he wanted. I think it was undemocratic, because as long as something stands for equality and freedom, it's democracy. I think these are, I mean, some of the strongest arguments in favor of democracy. You know, you can think of more. You can also think of arguments against this, and I'm sure I have just taken examples from India's case, but these can be applied across the world. Yeah. Um, Therefore, I mean, that's about it. I mean, like, every country that just fought for emancipation has ultimately fought for democracy. When India is fighting for independence against British, what were they fighting for? They were fighting for the power to elect their own people. They were Independence means, in fact, democracy. In apartheid, when the blacks were fighting for independence, what were they fighting for? They were not fighting for whites to go away. They were there for generations. I mean, how could they tell them to go away? They were basically saying, we want to vote too. That's all they were saying. In Myanmar, when people were fighting against the dictatorship, they were fighting for what? They were fighting for the people to be represented in the parliaments. Yeah. And so again, thank you. Let's meet in the, let's, I hope you found this interesting, and let's meet in the next class to discuss live. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Revant. It was indeed a very powerful lecture. So, students, we have to make best use of the arguments he was presenting. I think we have to listen to those arguments once again. So many arguments, so much logical analysis. So, your class task and evening task, both of them are designed based on the lecture. After the heated arguments, definitely you require a cool down.